Pay attention to Sabina Nessa, 28 years old, walking through a small London park on a warm Friday evening. She has less than 3 minutes left to live. Because Koci Selamaj, 36 years old, a gas station worker who drove 65 miles from his home, is watching her from the shadows. On this day, Sabina planned to meet friends at a pub 8 minutes from her apartment. On this day, Koci decided that an innocent woman would become the target of his rage. This is the story of a half-mile walk that ended a life and shattered a community. Sabina Nessa was exactly where she wanted to be in life. As a primary school teacher in London's Lewisham district, she spent her days with 30 children aged 5 and 6 at Rushy Green Primary School. Her students adored her. Parents praised her patience and warmth, but Sabina's ambitions reached beyond England's borders. She dreamed of teaching abroad, specifically in the Middle East, combining her passion for education with her desire to experience different cultures. Sabina had graduated from the University of Greenwich in 2014 with a sociology degree, then returned to earn her teaching certification from the University of Bedfordshire in 2020. Everything she did was purposeful, each step calculated to bring her closer to her goals. At 28, she had her life mapped out. Gain experience teaching in London, save money, then take her skills international. She had no idea that on September 17th, 2021, all those carefully laid plans would be destroyed in less than 3 minutes. On paper, Koci Selamaj was ordinary. A 36-year-old Albanian immigrant working at an Esso gas station in Eastbourne, a quiet coastal town about 65 miles south of London. He had been married to Ianella, who worked at the 5-star Grand Hotel in Eastbourne. To casual observers, he seemed like just another working-class man trying to make a life in England. But beneath that surface lurked something dark and volatile. Ianella had recently left him, and for good reason. In the weeks before their separation, Koci had become physically aggressive toward her multiple times. His behavior had escalated to the point where she feared for her safety. The separation should have been the end of their story. Instead, it was just the beginning of something far worse. Koci couldn't accept that his marriage was over. He began stalking Ianella at her workplace, booking a room at the Grand Hotel on September 17th, even though he lived just 5 minutes away. Hotel staff grew increasingly uncomfortable with his presence. He would loiter in the lobby, waiting for glimpses of his ex-wife, while openly staring at other women who passed by. His behavior was predatory, unsettling, unmistakably wrong. That Friday afternoon, Ianella agreed to speak with him in his car, hoping to reason with him one final time. The conversation quickly deteriorated. Sitting in the back seat, Koci made an inappropriate advance. Ianella was stunned by his audacity and immediately refused. She left him alone in that parking lot, angry and humiliated. What happened next was chilling behavior caught on camera. Instead of calming down or returning home, Koci made a decision that would end one life and destroy countless others. He got behind the wheel of his silver vehicle and drove 65 miles north to London. His plan was simple and horrifying. He would find a woman, any woman, to target, and he would achieve this goal by any means necessary. Security footage captured his arrival in Kidbrooke, a leafy suburb in Greenwich. He parked his car and walked into a local Sainsbury's supermarket. Cameras tracked him browsing the home goods section where he purchased a rolling pin. But the rolling pin wasn't quite right for what he had in mind. Back in his car, he swapped it for something more dangerous, a metal emergency warning triangle, the kind drivers keep in their vehicles for roadside breakdowns. The triangular reflector, folded into a compact weapon, would serve his violent purpose perfectly. He then walked toward Pegler Square, a road running alongside Cater Park, carrying his makeshift weapon and looking for an opportunity. The sun was setting, the park was emptying of families and joggers, and Sabina Nessa was running late for her meeting with friends. At 8:30 p.m., Sabina applied her makeup, chose one of her favorite dresses, and left her flat on Astley Road. She had 2 route options to reach the Depot pub where her friends waited: walk through residential streets or cut through Cater Park and then follow a well-lit main road. The park route was faster, shaving several minutes off her journey. Sabina had always felt uneasy about Cater Park, especially at night. She typically avoided it when walking alone, but tonight was different. She was running late, and the sun hadn't fully set yet. The park was small. She would only be inside it for 2 or 3 minutes at most. How much could happen in 3 minutes? As she entered the park, security cameras on Pegler Square captured Koci Selamaj's movements. He was holding the metal triangle, looking around nervously, checking behind him. Then he saw Sabina walking into the park alone. He put up his hood and followed her inside. Meanwhile, at the depot pub, Sabina's friends checked their phones. She should have arrived by now. The walk was only 8 minutes. They sent text messages, they tried calling. No response. As minutes turned into half an hour, concern began to build, but not alarm. Maybe something had come up. Maybe she couldn't make it and forgot to tell them. They continued their evening without her. But Sabina never forgot to communicate. She never ignored calls from friends, and she certainly hadn't changed her plans. She was already gone. Koci followed Sabina along the park's path, picking up his pace. When he was certain no one else was around, he broke into a sprint. She turned to face him, but before she could process what was happening, he swung the folded metal triangle toward her. Repeatedly, he struck her dozens of times with that metal triangle, inflicting severe trauma. She collapsed onto a park bench, consciousness slipping away with each passing second. But Koci wasn't finished. He dragged her unconscious body into nearby underbrush, disturbed her clothing, and asphyxiated her. He held her until the attack proved fatal. Then, with methodical precision, he covered her body with branches. He collected the pieces of the shattered metal triangle. He wiped down the park bench, and he disappeared into the gathering darkness, walking back to his car as if he had just completed a routine errand. Security cameras captured him driving away from Kidbrooke. Halfway back to Eastbourne, near Tunbridge Wells in Kent, he stopped and threw the broken triangle into the River Thames, hoping it would be lost forever. He arrived back at the Grand Hotel just after midnight, captured on lobby cameras, walking to his room as though nothing had happened. The next morning, he went to work at the Esso garage. Life continued as normal for Koci Selamaj, while Sabina Nessa's body lay hidden in Cater Park. Saturday, September 18th, started like any other day in Greenwich. The weather was mild, and Kidbrooke bustled with weekend activity. Joggers ran their usual routes. Parents took children to the park. Dog walkers explored the green spaces. One of those dog walkers entered Cater Park that afternoon. His dog began acting strangely near some tall grass at the park's edge, pulling towards something in the underbrush. The man walked closer to investigate. He saw a person lying in the long grass, covered with branches. Thinking someone might have passed out, he called out. No response. He stepped closer and saw a young woman. Then he saw the signs of severe injury, the unmistakable sign of violence. At 5:28 p.m., he dialed 999 to report finding a body in Cater Park. Police arrived within minutes, cordoning off the area. The victim was quickly identified as Sabina Nessa. She had been lying there for nearly 24 hours, hidden just meters from a path that hundreds of people use daily. The realization was devastating. Sabina had been taken in broad daylight in a small park in one of London's residential neighborhoods during what should have been a safe 8-minute walk. The news of Sabina's death sent shockwaves through the community. How could this happen in Kidbrooke? How could a young woman be attacked in a small park during the early evening? Parents who let their children play in Cater Park felt violated. Women who walked those paths felt vulnerable. The entire borough of Greenwich was shaken. Sabina's family received the devastating news on Saturday evening. Azra and Abdul Roof lost their daughter in the most tragic way imaginable. Her sisters lost their inspiration, their role model, the person who taught them to put themselves first and never let anyone put them down. Investigators immediately appealed to the public for information. They asked for surveillance footage, dash cam recordings, anything that might have captured activity near Cater Park on Friday evening. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people submitted footage and information. Police initially arrested 2 men, aged 38 and 41, but released them both due to lack of evidence. The investigation seemed to be stalling. Then came the breakthrough. Security cameras captured a man walking along Pegler Square around the time of the attack. He was holding an object in his hand, looking around suspiciously, checking behind him before putting up his hood and disappearing from view. Shortly after, a silver car was seen driving away from the area. On September 24th, 7 days after Sabina's murder, police released the surveillance footage to the public. The response was immediate. Multiple anonymous tips identified the man as Koci Selamaj, a gas station attendant from Eastbourne. When police arrived at Koci's small flat in Eastbourne to arrest him, he initially refused to speak. He sat in interrogation rooms, silent and stone-faced, offering nothing to investigators. But after being formally charged with Sabina's murder, he asked one question: what will happen to me if I open up now and say everything? Whatever deal was made, Koci began talking. He confessed to the entire sequence of events: his argument with Ianella, his drive to London, purchasing the rolling pin, choosing the metal triangle instead, stalking the streets for a victim, following Sabina into Cater Park, the fatal assault, disposing of evidence, and returning to Eastbourne as if nothing had happened. The autopsy results were inconclusive about the specific cause of death. The truth is, it doesn't matter which specific act ended her life. Koci Selamaj was responsible for both. The attack was driven by dark impulses, evidenced by him interfering with her clothing, but there was no evidence of further violation. What gave him gratification wasn't intimacy. It was violence. It was power. It was playing God with an innocent woman's life. Despite his confession, Koci initially pleaded not guilty to murder, though he admitted being responsible for Sabina's death. The contradiction made no sense to anyone following the case. He took her life. He admitted taking her life. But he claimed he wasn't guilty of murder. He was held in prison until February 2022, when he was scheduled to appear at the Old Bailey in London for a pre-sentencing hearing. This was when Sabina's family would finally be able to confront the man who took their daughter and sister. They prepared impact statements detailing the devastation he had caused. They wanted to look him in the eye and make him understand the magnitude of what he had taken from them. But Koci Selamaj, like the coward he truly was, refused to appear in court. He stayed in his cell. He changed his plea from not guilty to guilty, but he wouldn't face the family he destroyed. This sparked outrage not just from Sabina's loved ones, but from people across the United Kingdom. The fact that a perpetrator could simply choose not to appear in court felt like a final insult to the victim and her family. Think about that for a moment. You take a life in one of the most brutal ways imaginable. You stalk them, attack them repeatedly with a metal weapon, asphyxiate them, hide their body, and go about your life as if nothing happened. Then, when you're finally caught and forced to face the consequences, you get to avoid looking at the family whose lives you destroyed. You get to hide in your cell while they read statements to an empty chair. Sabina's family was furious. They had prepared to tell Koci exactly what he had taken from them. They wanted him to hear about the daughter who would never teach abroad, the sister who would never give them nieces and nephews, the friend who would never celebrate another birthday, the teacher whose students cried when they learned she was gone. They wanted him to know that Sabina wasn't just a random woman in a park. She was a person with dreams, with plans, with people who loved her. But he robbed them of even that small measure of justice. The judge sentenced Koci Selamaj to life in prison with a minimum term of 36 years. He won't be eligible for parole until he reaches 72 years old. Hopefully, he will pass away behind bars, never tasting freedom again. But even that sentence feels inadequate when you consider what he took and what he refused to give. Sabina's tragedy sparked citywide conversations about women's safety in London. Her case became linked with other high-profile tragedies. Sarah Everard, who was kidnapped and killed by a police officer while walking home, and Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman, two sisters taken in a park. These cases highlighted a disturbing pattern. Women couldn't feel safe walking in their own neighborhoods, even in well-populated areas, even in daylight. Vigils were held throughout Greenwich and across London. Thousands of people gathered to light candles, place flowers, and demand change. The community rallied around Sabina's family, but their grief was immeasurable. Her students lost a teacher who made them feel special every single day. Her friends lost someone who always showed up, who always answered her phone, who always kept her promises, all because one man decided his temporary rage was worth more than her entire life. The most terrifying aspect of Sabina's case is its randomness. She wasn't targeted because of who she was or anything she did. She was simply the first lone woman Koci saw after deciding to commit violence. Sabina took reasonable precautions. She usually avoided Cater Park at night. She walked in well-lit areas, but she was running late, the sun hadn't set yet, and the park was only 2 or 3 minutes to walk through. What woman hasn't made similar calculations? What person hasn't taken a shortcut they usually avoid because they're in a hurry? We can't live our lives in constant fear. We shouldn't have to. But cases like Sabina's remind us that danger exists, and sometimes it's just waiting for an opportunity. Sabina's case reignited an important debate about defendants' rights to refuse court appearances. In the United Kingdom, and in many jurisdictions worldwide, defendants cannot be physically forced to attend their sentencing hearings. They can simply refuse, and there's nothing courts can do about it. But victims' families and advocates argue that this policy adds insult to injury. The perpetrator has already taken everything from the victim and their loved ones, allowing them to also avoid accountability, to hide from the impact statements and the pain they caused, feels like granting them one final act of control. This isn't just a legal question. It's a moral one. It's about what we owe to victims, what we owe to their families, and what kind of justice system we want to have. Should courts have the power to compel defendants to attend their sentencing hearings? Should victims' families have the right to face the person who destroyed their lives, regardless of whether that person wants to be there? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you or someone you know been affected by a similar situation? How would you change the system? These conversations matter because cases like Sabina's keep happening, and we owe it to victims and their families to keep pushing for change. Sabina Nessa should be 31 years old now. She should be teaching, maybe in Dubai or Saudi Arabia, living the international experience she dreamed about. She should be video chatting with her parents and sisters, sharing stories about her students and her adventures abroad. She should be building a life filled with purpose and joy. Instead, her life ended in 3 minutes of senseless violence. Koci Selamaj is serving his sentence in a British prison. He gets 3 meals a day. He has a roof over his head. He breathes and exists, while Sabina doesn't. And when faced with the opportunity to explain himself, to acknowledge what he took, to look at Sabina's family and accept responsibility, he chose to hide in his cell like the coward he is. Sabina's sisters continue to honor her memory. They hold vigils. They advocate for women's safety. They refuse to let her passing be forgotten or reduced to a statistic. They want the world to remember that Sabina was beautiful, talented, caring, and full of potential. They want people to know that she didn't pass away because she made bad choices or took unnecessary risks. She was taken because a violent man decided his feelings mattered more than her life. Her family continues to fight for change, to ensure that Sabina's tragedy wasn't completely meaningless. They want better protections for women. They want courts to consider victims' families when making rules about defendant appearances. They want the world to be safer than it was on that September evening when their beloved Sabina walked into Cater Park and never came out. Every day, millions of people take short walks just like Sabina's. 8 minutes from home to a pub. 8 minutes through a familiar neighborhood. 8 minutes that should have been completely safe and utterly forgettable. But for Sabina Nessa, those 8 minutes ended everything. Remember Sabina's name. Remember that she was more than a headline. She was a teacher, a daughter, a sister, a friend. She had dreams and plans and people who loved her. She deserved to live those 8 minutes and the decades that should have followed. And remember that justice isn't just about prison sentences. It's about accountability. It's about facing the people you hurt. It's about not being allowed to hide from the consequences of your actions. If you've made it this far, thank you for taking the time to learn about Sabina's story. Please share this article to raise awareness about violence against women and the gaps in our justice system. Leave your thoughts about mandatory court attendance in the comments below. And most importantly, look out for each other, check on your friends, walk each other home. We're all we've got.